Yeah, last week we kicked off this teaching series called Get Your Bag. We are talking about a money mindset that God blesses. We're talking about shifting our financial perspective and approach so that we can shift our financial outlook, all right? The series is based on the parable of the talents that's found in Matthew chapter number 25. And last week in the first message in the series, we learned the truth that God is the owner, I'm just the manager. Everything I have has been given to me by God to manage or to steward for however long I may possess it or however long I may be here on earth. But in the end, it's all temporary because He's the owner and I'm just the manager. Now, today what I want to do is I want to share with you what we could call the second shift in perspective that we're going to need to make if we want to have this money mindset that God blesses. If we want to see money the way that He does, if we want to use money the way that Christ calls us to, the second thing that we're going to have to understand is that, and I hope this isn't too offensive. I'm hoping it's helpful, okay? But your money problems are not what you think they are. The problems you have with your finances are not what you think they are. Let me show you what I mean. Matthew chapter 25. We're going to read the exact same text that we read last week. We're going to pull out a totally different principle and perspective on it. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14, Jesus teaches us the parable of the talents. He says again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. One quick note you might remember from last week, I told you that this phrase in English, bag of silver, in the original language, it was called a talent. It was a unit of money. And so if you hear me say talent today, I'm talking about a literal bag of money. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver, or 5 talents, began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. So the master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid that I would lose your money. So I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your original talent back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least then I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have in abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Woo! Okay, I want to give you kind of the bottom line principle. This second shift that's got to take place in our perspective if we want to have a money mindset that God blesses. I want to give it to you right at the top of the message and then spend the rest of our time showing you how it's true from this particular passage. So here it is. Write it down. This is what we're going to be talking about today. God is less concerned with what I have than how I use what I have. God is less concerned with what I have than how I use what I have. Now, look, I'm no different than you are, okay? If you ask me, what is the root cause of my financial problems? It's that I don't have enough money. Okay? If I'm feeling financial stress and pressure, I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills, or I can't buy all the things that I might want to, and you ask me, Dan, how come that's your reality? I'm going to say, well, I just don't have enough money. If I had more money, then all of my problems would go away. If I had a little extra income, then I wouldn't be as stressed as I am. Give me a decent raise, give me a promotion. Somehow, God, let me win the lottery. Let me win that 50-50 draw. I don't know how you're going to do it, but if you would just give me more money, then I would not have the issues that I do. But is that really the case? Let's take a look at what Jesus actually says, what he teaches here in the parable. The first thing I want you to notice is that each servant received a different amount of money to manage. Did you notice that? Now, I apologize if there are any socialists in the room, okay? But the master didn't give everyone equal resources. One got 5, one got 2, one only got 1. And there's certainly a little part of me that's like, well, that's not fair, right? How come that guy gets 5 and that guy only gets 1? Especially if I put myself into the parable and I find out I'm only a 2-bagger. I'm like, well, how come they're a 5-bagger? I want to be a 5-bagger, God. How come I'm not a 5-bagger and they are? But remember, this is the master's money. And it's his to divvy up however he wants to. If he wants to give 5 to her and 2 to him and 1 to them, that's his business because it's his money. He can choose to use it and apportion it however he sees fit. I also don't want you to overlook that detail that Jesus gave there in the passage. If you look back in verse number 15, it says that he divided it in proportion to their abilities. The master knew things about his servants that either they may have known it, or they may have been totally unaware of it, you know? God had some insight into their ability to manage the resources that he gave them. And based on their abilities, he divided them. 5 bags, 2 bags, or 1 bag. Another way to think about this is the master gave them what they needed to accomplish the assignment he had for them. You understand what I'm saying here? The 2-bagger, God's expectation, his assignment for them was to double the 2 that they had been given. They didn't need 5 bags, they only needed 2. The resources were given in proportion to their ability and the assignment that their master had for them. Now, by the way, I should mention here, okay? I made a crack a moment ago about socialism, but we're going to see next week that Jesus has a pretty harsh critique for unbridled capitalism, too, in this teaching. So this isn't about economic theory here. This is about individual responsibility when it comes to the resources we've been entrusted with. Each servant received a different amount of money to manage. Now, if this idea still bothers you, you're like, God, I don't know why you think I'm not capable of handling 5 bags, because I promise you I am. If there is a disparity between what you know or believe yourself to be capable of and what God seems to be saying your ability might be in the moment, can I just encourage you? You can always grow your ability. Do you understand that? I used to get so weirded out by this passage. I'm like, man, what if I was just born and God said, yeah, he's a 2-bagger? And I'm like, I don't want to be a 2-bagger. I want to be a 5-bagger. I don't want to be a 2-bag pastor. I want to be a 5-bag pastor. I don't want to have 2 bags of resources to serve the kingdom with. I want to have 5 or 10 or whatever. And I was listening to a pastor preach on this passage one time, and he said, you can always grow in your abilities. Like, consider the fact that after the master returned from his trip, he said to the 5-bag servant, because you have been faithful with what I've been giving you, I can now entrust you with even more resources. See, at the end of the parable, the 5-bagger is going to become a 10-bagger. And the 2-bagger in this story is going to be a 5-bagger in the next story. And the 5-bagger in this story was probably the 2-bagger in the last story. So if you're like, oh man, this means that some people are born to be rich and apparently I was born to be poor. No, you can always increase your ability. You can always increase or get better at your ability, okay? God gives more to those who prove they can handle more. God gives more to those who prove they can handle more. Now, the second thing I want you to notice here about this parable is that although they received differing amounts of money, every servant was still incredibly wealthy. I told you last week, a talent, one single talent was worth 20 years' wages for the average laborer in Jesus' day. This was somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. So let's peg it right in the middle and say $1.5 million. You look at the servant that had 1 talent and you're like, oh, that poor guy, he's so poor. But no, like, he had a lot of resources that had been entrusted. By the time you get to 2 bags and 5 bags, but whether it's 1 or it's 5, we're talking about people that had been given a lot of wealth in order to steward during their master's absence. Are you ready for an uncomfortable truth? By any objective measure, the people in this room this morning are among the wealthiest people on planet Earth right now. You didn't know it, but you woke up filthy rich this morning. Okay? And I know you're thinking, Dan, you don't know my circumstances, and clearly you don't know what you're talking about. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but I've never been called rich. My boss is rich. The people who live in that community are rich. The people who drive those sorts of cars are rich, but not me. And listen, I hear you. I do. I understand that perspective. I have felt that way. I've wrestled through this myself, okay? If your reference point is only the people in our city around you, okay? Then it's not going to be hard to find people who have a lot more resources than you. I'll also point out it wouldn't be that hard to find people that have a lot less resources than you, but regardless, just kind of limiting our comparison to our immediate community is a bit arbitrary, isn't it? Like, I think the only way that we can fully understand just how good we actually have it is to compare ourselves to everybody who's alive around the world right now and to get a global perspective on what our particular circumstances actually look like. So let me share with you some global facts about wealth, some truth about the world that you live in. First, the median income globally is $240 a month. I want you to let what I just said sink in for a moment. The average person around the world today lives on about $3,000 per year. I won't even ask you to raise your hand if you live on $3,000 a year, because almost none of us do. There might be one or two. But I mean, that's an incredibly low number, isn't it? Sobering number, really. Okay. Let's say you work a full-time job in Alberta and you get paid minimum wage. And you're like, man, I'm making the minimum. Minimum. If you work a full-time minimum wage job in Alberta, you are in the 88th percentile of wage earners around the world. Just like with very simple rounding, 9 out of 10 people are worse off than you are in a minimum wage job in Canada. Oh, man. Then, if your household income is over 125,000 Canadian. Now, I know for some of you guys are like, I wish. That's a joke. Are you kidding me? There are a fair number of people in this room and in this church that that's true about. If your household income is 125K or more, you're a 1%er, baby. 1% of the top income earners in the entire world. Do you understand that for people in the third world, you earn $125,000 worth of household income, you are in the same category in their mind as Elon Musk and Oprah. They cannot comprehend. They cannot fathom what it would be like to earn $125,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 a year. Are you kidding me? That is an unreal and very hard to understand amount of money for them. So I'm telling you, when you only compare yourself to the people in our city, yeah, you might not compare as well to certain people. But when you compare yourself to the people around the world, you will come out better than more than half of the folks on the planet every single time. The poorest of us in Canada are still far wealthier than the vast majority of the world. Those of you that have immigrated here from other parts of the world, you understand this more clearly than those of us that were born here. You have seen levels of need and poverty and difficulty that the average Canadian or American really struggles to wrap their brain around. But the truth is, all of us are way wealthier than we realize. Now, if you doubt that, if you're like, no, you don't get it. I mean, I struggle. I understand, okay? So here's my invitation to you. Tuesday night, I'm going with our serve group down to the drop-in center downtown. We're going to serve dinner to people down there. And I want you to come with me, and I want you to serve dinner. It takes about 30 minutes. It's super fast. And then after we get done serving, I want you to sit down at one of the tables, and I want you to proceed to tell the residents of the drop-in center how little you have. I want you to tell them about all your financial problems. I want you to tell them about the house you live in. I want you to tell them about the car you drive and how it's not as nice as the car your sister drives. I want you to tell them about how little you have. Any takers? No. Because although there might be a few people in our church that are, below the poverty line and really suffering and genuinely have little, even in comparison to people living at a place like the drop-in center, for the vast majority of us, guys, we are so much wealthier than we realize. And this is one of the tactics of our spiritual enemy. He will try to convince us that we're poor. He'll try to convince us that we don't have enough. And if we just had more, then we could obey God. Then we could be generous. Then we could help people that are in need. But the numbers don't bear it out. We are far wealthier than we realize. Oh, if I just had more money, then all my financial issues would go away. But you've already proven that wrong a few times in your life, haven't you? Okay, to borrow some language from the parable here. There was a time in your life when you were a one-bagger. You were fresh out of high school, you're working as a college student, just graduated, cracking into the field, and you were essentially a one-bagger. And you said to yourself, I don't know how anybody is expected to make it on one bag. This is ridiculous. But if I had two, oh man, if I could get a promotion, if I could get a job in the industry, if I could just take one bag and move it to two, I can't even imagine how easy life would be with two bags. Are you kidding me? So you put your nose to the grindstone, you worked diligently for a couple of years, you got your promotion, you were offered a job contract in the industry that you studied for, and suddenly you were no longer a one-bagger, you became a two-bagger. And for a little while, your financial trouble went away. And you're like, see, I knew it. All along, the answer to my financial struggles was more money. I get another bag, and suddenly I don't have to sweat and stress as much as I always have. But then a funny thing happened. See, over time, the stress that you used to experience at one bag came back. It's like you started to have the same pressures today with two bags that you did then with one bag. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't know why I thought two bags was enough. Obviously, two bags is not enough for any sane person to live. Cost of living, you can't live on two bags. You got to have 5 bags. God, if you would give me 5 bags, I would never have to sweat or stress about money again. 5 bags is all I need. And so you worked hard for several more years. You got a promotion. You married somebody who was a 3-bagger themselves. Now your household is a 5-bag household. And here we are, saying the same things again. How does anybody live on 5 bags? Like, it takes at least 8 or 10 to live as a family in Calgary these days, right? At some point, we have to own the fact that our financial problems keep cropping up no matter our level of income. The same problems rear their head no matter how much money I end up making. So maybe the real problem is not how much I'm making, but how I'm using what I am making. When I told you earlier, God is more concerned with how I use what I have than what I actually have. It's not that earning is bad. It's not that, I'm not saying, I don't want money and a raise is not welcome and I'm not trying to get a return on investment or anything like that. But what I'm saying is the deep work that we need to do is not on the income side. It's on the expenditure side, so that we don't lose whatever we might gain on the income side in the years to come. In fact, can I do this? Can I let you in on a financial secret that absolutely changed my life? First time I heard it, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I've never forgotten it, and it has totally transformed my perspective on this. I think it'll be as helpful to you as it was to me. Here you go. Money simply makes you more of what you already are. Money simply makes you more of what you already are. See, what we think, what our culture tells us, what the devil wants you to believe, honestly, is that if I could just get more money, then I could be generous. Then I'll become a saver. Then I'll become wise in how I use my resources. But hear what I'm saying. If you were wasteful at one bag, you're going to be twice as wasteful at two bags. If you were stingy at two bags, you're still going to be stingy at five bags. And if you're generous at five bags, I can almost guarantee you that you were already generous at two bags. Why? Because money can't change your heart. You think money is going to change the way you spend, but spending is a heart issue. It's a priorities issue. And money won't change that. In fact, it'll only make it worse. You will become more of what you already are when you finally have money to throw at it. This is why the master says to both of his good servants, you have been faithful with what you were given, so now you're ready for even more responsibilities. See, you prove whether or not you will be generous at five bags with what you do when you have two bags. You prove whether or not you can manage two bags well based on how you manage one bag. It's not a matter of increase my income and then I can. No, it's start to do what you should do now, and you will prove that you'll be capable of doing it later when the income increases. All right? So let's get super practical. For the rest of our message, let's try to let's not talk theory. How do we make this happen? How do we address our spending? How do we honor God in the way that we use the income that we have? The first thing I'll tell you is so simple, you're going to be mad at me for saying it. You need a budget. You need a budget. I know that sounds so elementary that it's like you're insulting us as adults by saying that I need a budget. I know I need a budget, thank you. Then why don't you have one? Like, the vast majority of people don't have a firm budget. And even if they have a budget written down, they don't actually stick to it. We know this because I counsel a lot of people that find themselves in financial difficulty. And they'll come to me and they'll say, Pastor Dan, will you pray for me that God will release supernatural resources into my life? Yes, I am very glad to. I want God to take you from a two-bagger to a five-bagger. I want him to give you more opportunity and resource than you've ever thought possible so that you can use it for his kingdom work. But in order to manage five bags well, you're going to have to manage two bags well. So are you actually managing your two bags well? And when we get into those conversations, we find out there is a ton of debt. We're spending money on things that make no sense at all given our current financial circumstances. We're really worried about appearance. We're worried about how other people perceive us. Oh, you don't understand, Dan. In my industry, we have to drive this kind of car. We have to. Otherwise, nobody takes you seriously. Oh, my gosh. Okay. And that's fine. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Maybe that's true. So if you have to drive a super expensive, fancy car, then you're going to live in a cheaper house, right? Because the car is what people are going to see, and that's going to give you the wealth that you... Oh, no, we want to live in a really nice house, too. You can't have everything, guys. Okay, I love you. I'm trying to help. You can't have everything. So you've got to have a budget. John Maxwell very famously says, a budget is telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went. When you don't have a budget, when you don't track your income or your expenditure monthly, I'm not talking about, generally I kind of understand where my money's going each year. No, if you don't know where it goes weekly and monthly, then it's going to disappear and you're going to look around and you're going to say, how am I so poor? I was so excited when I got this raise. I thought it was all the money that I would ever need, and now I don't have enough. What happened? A lot of it comes down to the fact that you haven't even set an actual budget that you're living according to. We offer financial peace universities here at the class. And many, many people have gone through them. And it's one of the biggest things that we talk about in those classes is you know you need a budget, so you actually got to make one. And then after you make one, the family has to stick to it. I know how hard that is. I'm a spender, you guys. It's not an easy thing to stay under a budget for me. And yet, if you want to live financially free, if you want to have this money mindset that God blesses, then you're going to have to be wise in both your income and your expenditures. And listen to me now. It is easier today than it has ever been in history to make and keep a budget. Do you realize this? Like I'm about to be 43 in a couple of weeks. And so I'm old enough to remember when there was no internet, there were no banking apps. Everything was done by hand. You're like, when am I ever going to need to learn, multiplication tables and long division and adding by hand? There was a time in my life where this is the only way we could balance our bank account. We would do all of this by hand. These days, you don't have to do any of that. You literally find a good app. You can link your bank account to it. It'll track every single dollar that comes in, every single dollar that comes out. It could not be any easier. If you don't have a budget, if you're not operating according to wise budgeting principles, the only person that's responsible for that is you. Amber and I use an app called Every Dollar. It's put out by the Ramsey Group. We love it, highly recommend it. You guys should check it out. It's on the App Store, Google Play, Android, Apple, whatever other, opportunities or places there might be there. Check it out and use it. It's worth it. You've got to get your mind around the numbers if you're going to get control of the numbers. All right, I'm probably belaboring that point too much, but honestly, it's shocking the number of people that have financial trouble and they have no clue how they got there. And it's because they haven't done any sort of basic accounting for it. Okay, beyond a basic budget, I want you to consider that after you pay your taxes, we'll talk post-tax income today. Everybody's always like, should I give off of my pre-tax income or my gross or net? Who cares? Just give. Anyway, let's just talk post-tax. Let's talk net income today. Beyond paying your taxes, there are really only three things you can do with your money. There are only three things you can do with your money. You can spend it, you can save it, or you can give it. That's it. That's all you can do. Everything you might do in life is a form of one of those three things. And listen, that's the order that most people process their budget. Taxes, expenses, savings, and then last of all, giving. But hear me, and you know this is true. By the time you pay your taxes and your expenses, there's basically nothing left for savings or giving, right? You ready for a couple more uncomfortable numbers? Okay. Except for the 2 years of the pandemic. We got real wise during the years of the pandemic. Actually, we didn't get wise. We just lost opportunity. We couldn't go on trips. We couldn't go to the movie theater. So, we didn't have as much to spend our money on. Except for the 2 years of the pandemic, okay? The average Canadian saves approximately 2% of their salary. 2% of their salary goes into savings or investments, and the average Canadian gives 0.5% to charity. Which means that for most of us, 97.5% of our income is in the spend it category. So if we start with taxes and expenses, it's not really surprising that we might have only 1% or 2% that's left over for this other important stuff, saving and giving. Now listen, I don't believe that this is because the average Canadian is foolish or stingy. I really don't. I believe, like I said last week, every person is actually generous at heart. And I believe that the vast majority of people are not stingy, not selfish. They want to help. The problem is they have ordered their priorities. They have ordered their financial life in the wrong way. See, rather than saying we're going to do it by spend, save, and give, I think Christians are called to invert the order. We give first, we save second, and we spend what's left. I know it's revolutionary, right? I should be charging thousands of dollars for this financial seminar. So good. But honestly, if you were to reorder your life this way, your financial life this way, you would see things change. I know that because I had to do it in my own life. Give first, save second, spend last. Now listen, I'm not talking, about amounts here, okay? So don't hear me saying you should give more than you spend. That's not reasonable. I understand that. And I'm not saying that you should save less than you give. It's not about amount, it's about priority. It's about what happens first. What's my primary commitment, and how does that determine and dictate anything else that might happen afterwards? We give first, save second, and we spend last. Let me show you what the Apostle Paul says 1 Corinthians chapter number 16, verses 1 and 2. He says this, "Now about the collection for the Lord's people in need." Stop there for just a moment. Paul is going to be talking about giving, and he says to Christian believers, your giving really serves two purposes. It serves people who are in need and the Lord's kingdom. All of our giving really should be ordered towards helping people that are in need and serving God's kingdom. He says, now about the collection for the Lord's people who are in need, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. Now, remember, he's writing this to the Corinthian church. They're in a different region of the ancient Roman Empire. Today, this is a different country. These are different cultures. They would have spoken different languages. And so he's not giving like a specific instruction that only applies in this one circumstance, this one group of people. He's saying, no, like do what I've been telling all of God's churches to do on the first day of every week. The first day of every week. Why Sunday? Because that's the day you gather to worship. Giving is an act of worship. Giving is a part of your worship. When you gather to worship, giving should be a component of it. That's why we do a giving segment every single week. That's why we talk about giving every single week, because it is a normal and historical part of Christian worship on the first day of every week. I also think it's interesting here, he doesn't say, hey, on Saturday, make sure you set aside. No, he says the first day of the week. Why? Because this is the first thing we do. It's the first part of our week. First thing, Sunday morning, I'm thinking about what I'm giving to the Lord as a response to what he has given me. On the first day of each week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. In keeping with your income. Now, I want you to notice he doesn't say in keeping with your disposable income. He doesn't say in keeping with whatever you might have left after you have paid the government and bought everything you wanted to buy and did all the things you wanted to do with your money. No, he doesn't say that. He says, don't base your giving on your expenses, which is what we do. This is the little bit that I have left, so I'm going to give 0.5%. No, he says, base your giving first on your income, saving it up so when I come, no collections will have to be made. Paul is essentially saying here, guys, like, you know what I'd rather be preaching to you about? Jesus. Hey, can I tell you, I'd rather be preaching to you this morning about Jesus. I really would. If we just got behind what we know the Scripture says in regards to generous living for Christians, and we were just doing it, then I wouldn't even have to bring this up. We wouldn't have to do a 4-week series on money. But here we are. And so Paul says, listen, if you would do this, we could focus on more important things. Now, in this passage, okay, Paul is clearly teaching percentage giving here, right? Set a sum of money that is in keeping with your income aside for the Lord's people in need. He's talking about percentage giving, but you notice he doesn't actually give a percentage here, right? Like, that's kind of weird. Why is he so vague? Why doesn't he say, hey, set aside this percentage of your money to give towards this particular cause? And I think the answer comes down to the fact that if he gave a specific number, people would become fixated on that specific number, okay? So let's take the typical tithe. Okay, tithe is a very common thing taught throughout the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. We're going to talk more about the tithe in a couple of weeks here. But a tithe is a tenth, 1/10, 10% of your income set aside for kingdom purposes, okay? For generosity and giving in the church, outside the church, whatever, okay? 10%. Now, if Paul had said on the first day of your week, on the first day of the week, I want you to set aside 10% of your income for the Lord's people who are in need. Those people in the church who were giving like 2% of their income would be like, 10%? This fool crazy. Are you joking me? 10%? You want me to quintuple the amount of money I have set aside for generosity? Absolutely not. There is no way that could ever happen. And what will happen is they'll say, well, if 10% is the standard, there ain't much difference between 2% and no percent. I might as well give no percent because I'm already being disobedient. So apparently, I might as well just not give anything. I know that happens. And on the flip side of it, people that are giving more than 10%, and hey, there are a lot of people in this church that are giving more than 10%. There are a lot of people who carry the weight of those who give nothing or next to nothing. Like, you understand, I say this all the time, the gospel is free, ministry ain't. Somebody's got to pay for this to happen. And there are people that do it in the church. And to those of you guys that are tithing 10% and you're giving 15% or 20%, God, some people are giving 30% of their income. You guys are heroes. We don't know it, but the Lord sees it, and I believe with all of my heart He will honor it. But there's a risk if we only hold up 10% that those people that are giving such a high percentage are going to be like, oh, you mean I could just give 10 and the other 90 is for me to do with what I want. No, what we talked about last week is 100% of it is God's. All of it is God's. So He doesn't give us this specific number so we don't become hyper-fixated on that particular number. Instead, this is the way I think we should best frame it. And that is, a tenth is the target. A tenth is the target. A tenth is the target. It's a good general rule of thumb for how much of your income should be set aside throughout the year for kingdom giving. Now look, when I say target, your mind immediately goes to a bullseye target, right? And 10% is the bullseye. I don't mean that kind of target. I'm talking about a different kind of target. Any runners in the room? None. There's not a single hand that got raised. Oh, we had one over here. Okay. Whew, off in the wing. I was like, boy, our church needs some exercise. Anyway, okay. All right. If somebody's chasing you, a bear is chasing you in Banff. Okay. I was not prepared for that. Okay. If you've ever tried to run, you may have set for yourself a running target. And you'll say, I want to run from here to that bridge without stopping. And so you try. And the first few times, you can't do it. But you keep trying, and eventually you're able to run from here to that bridge a kilometer away. And then once you get there, you don't say, I've arrived, I'm ready for the Olympics. No, you set a new target for yourself. The old target is the old target. Now there's a new one. Same thing with like speed. You say, I want to run a kilometer in this many minutes. And once you hit it, then you set a new target. You try to do it even faster. A tenth is the target. It's the target. It's what you're aiming for. And then, hear me, once you get there, by the time you get there, it's like so natural. It's almost easy, frankly. I've been doing this for decades now. And I couldn't imagine giving less than 10%. Couldn't imagine it because I've learned I don't even need it. I thought I did. I thought there's no way I could make it. There's no way I could be happy. There's no way that people would look at me and see anything that they liked because I'm just so poor and sad. No, it turns out I'm perfectly fine living on 90% of my income. There have been seasons in our life where we've lived on 70% of our income. And guess what? Here we are. We're okay. So 10th is the target. It's what we're working towards. And then once we get there, we learn so much about what we need and what we don't really need, about God's trustworthiness and faithfulness in our financial circumstances, that we're able to set new targets and go further than we ever thought we possibly could. So let me leave you with a couple of questions for reflection, okay? These are, again, just for you in the privacy of your own heart between you and the Lord. First question is this: what would it look like to take a step forward in your giving? What would it look like to take one step forward? Now, you got to start where you are, okay? If you're giving 0%, if I get up here today, there are, some pastors that are like, 10%, give 10%, or you're in sin, God's going to judge you. I just know in my own life, I had to take it in baby steps. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I had more faith. I wish I had more obedience, but I didn't. And so if you're at 0%, could you set a target? Like starting this month, could you set a target and say, you know what? I could probably give away 2% of my income this year, or this month, and I would be okay. It might mean that I change a couple of things, but I could do it. I'm not even saying give it to Connect. I don't care. Give it to another church. Just give it to the kingdom, and you're going to discover that you can trust God with it. If you're giving 5%, what would it look like to give more? If you're giving 10%, God bless you. What would it look like to give offerings? What would it look like to join our legacy team? What would it look like to serve people in our city beyond just the tithing that you do here to the church? What would it look like to take one more step forward? I'm not asking you to run a marathon. I'm not asking you to give away 50% or 100% of your income. I'm saying, what would it do? What would it look like to take one step forward in your giving? Second question, how do I get my spouse and I on the same page when it comes to giving? Listen, if you're single, you think to yourself, man, when I get married, it's going to be so easy because we're going to have 2 incomes, and then we're going to be able, we just have so much money, we can give and give and give and give. All the married people in the room can testify, it gets harder to give when you get married. You know why? Because you got to get 2 people to agree. And you got to get 2 people to agree on a number. It is very difficult to do. It is very hard to get on the same page. But if you're not on the same page currently with your spouse, that's okay. Your faith may be at a different point than theirs is right now. There are a few things you can do. Number one, you guys should be talking about it. You should be praying together over this as best as you possibly can. And if there is a lack of alignment and agreement on what we should do here, then try to find a compromise. Try to find something that works. So if one spouse is like, I just believe in the principle of tithing, I want to give 10%, and the spouse is like, you're completely nuts, I'm not giving a single dollar. Okay, we can't both demand our way and the other person doesn't get anything they want. So is there a compromise? Could we give 3%? Could we try 2%? Could we give 5%? I don't know what the number is, but there needs to be communication. There's probably going to have to be compromise and work to bring about unity. Here's what I'll say. If there's not unity around the generosity piece, there's probably not unity around the savings piece, and there's probably not unity around the spending piece either. So if we could bring unity in one category, we'll probably start to find unity in others. Last question is this. How might my spending need to change in order to prioritize my savings and my giving? Savings is wisdom. Giving is generosity. Spending is about me. So I want to prioritize my wisdom and my generosity in such a way that I know I'm comfortable with it. I'm happy with it. God is honored by it. And that means I'm going to have to change the way that I spend. I may not be able to go to Starbucks every day. I may not be able to drive that kind of car. I may have to say no to all the trips that I want to go on. But for me, the call and the opportunity to give, and then the security that savings brings, it's more than worth the trade-off. I've been at points in my financial life where I've just laid awake at night, stressed, and my wife is crying, and we're wondering, are we going to lose this? How are we going to pay that? How are we ever going to get out of this hole that we've been in? And listen, there's not a trip on the planet that's worth that. There's not a car lease that is worth those nights. There is not anything that I could buy that is worth losing my marriage or my family over. So I may have to reorder my spending, but that's okay, because the comfort, the peace, and the security that it brings is always worth the sacrifice. Dave Ramsey always says this: if you'll live like no one else today, you can live like no one else tomorrow. If you'll do wise things today, you'll have resources and opportunity ahead of you in the future that you could not have taken advantage of if you didn't start to make some choices in your financial life here and now. Oh God, would you just bless us? We need your Holy Spirit's help. We need the wisdom of your word. And so I'm praying, God, that you would just work. Give us a spirit of generosity, a desire to take steps forward in our giving and service to you. Help us to see money as a responsibility, not just a resource. God, as an opportunity to honor you and to make a difference in the world, not simply to buy me the things that I want. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So good. Thank you.